I used to believe love was something you could postpone. That if it was real, it would wait. That you could set it aside, handle practical things first, build something solid and sensible, and then come back for it later, when life was calmer, safer, more predictable. That belief ruined my life. 10 seconds into this confession, here is the truth I never said out loud: I didn't lose love because it failed. I lost it because I treated it like an option instead of a choice. When I met them, my life wasn't falling apart. That's important. I wasn't desperate. I wasn't lonely in an obvious way. I had a plan. A trajectory. A version of the future that made sense to everyone who looked at it from the outside. Career moving forward. Finances improving. Stability within reach. Love arrived at the wrong time, or so I told myself. It didn't explode into my life dramatically. It unfolded slowly, quietly, in conversations that lasted longer than they should have, in silences that felt safe instead of awkward. It was the kind of connection that doesn't demand attention but reshapes your internal landscape without asking permission. That scared me. Not because it was unhealthy. Because it was real. I remember the first moment I felt it clearly. We were talking about nothing important, and suddenly I realized I was fully present. Not calculating. Not planning. Not preparing my next move. Just there. That level of presence felt dangerous. Because it didn't fit into my schedule. I told myself I was being responsible. That love was unpredictable. That commitment built on emotion alone was reckless. I framed my hesitation as maturity, my distance as wisdom. They never pressured me. That made it worse. They asked honest questions. About my future. About what I wanted. About whether I saw room for something real between us. Not demands, invitations. And every time, I answered carefully. I spoke in maybes. In not yets. In conditions. I said things like, once things settle, and, after this phase, and, when I'm more stable. They listened. They waited. And each time they waited, I lost something I didn't know how to name. I didn't realize then that love doesn't fade loudly. It withdraws quietly when it realizes it's not welcome yet. The more stable my life became on paper, the more unstable I felt inside. Promotions came. Responsibilities increased. My days filled with things that made sense but felt empty. And still, I postponed the decision. Because choosing love would have meant choosing uncertainty. It would have meant risking the version of myself everyone respected. I convinced myself I was protecting us both. In reality, I was protecting the image of control. There was a moment, I can still see it clearly, when they looked at me differently. Not with anger. Not with sadness. With acceptance. That was the moment I should have been afraid. They told me they couldn't keep waiting for a future that only existed in theory. That they needed someone who chose them now, not eventually. I nodded. I understood. And I let them go. I told myself it was the right decision. That love should fit into your life, not disrupt it. That timing matters more than feeling. That stability is the foundation everything else stands on. For a while, that story worked. My life moved forward exactly as planned. The chaos never came. The risks were avoided. From the outside, I looked successful. Grounded. Sensible. Inside, something had gone permanently quiet. I tried dating again. Connections felt shallow. Conversations felt rehearsed. I kept comparing without meaning to, not because the others weren't good, but because I knew what real presence felt like, and it wasn't there. I realized then that I hadn't chosen stability. I had chosen fear with better branding. And the worst part? There was no dramatic regret at first. Just a dull, growing awareness that I had closed a door that wouldn't reopen. Because love that waits too long learns how to leave without noise. And I was left alone with a life that made perfect sense, and meant almost nothing to me. The regret didn't arrive all at once. That's the part no one warns you about. It didn't crash into me the day they left. It didn't knock me to the floor or steal my sleep immediately. In the beginning, I felt relieved. That's the word I'm ashamed to admit. Relieved that I didn't have to decide anymore. Relieved that the tension was gone. Relieved that my life could return to its planned trajectory without the inconvenience of feeling too much. For a while, stability felt like victory. My days were efficient. Predictable. Clean. I knew where I was going and how long it would take to get there. I filled my calendar. I met expectations. I advanced. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, something inside me began to starve. It started with small moments. Ordinary ones. A song playing in a cafe that I knew they would have loved. A phrase someone used that sounded like their voice. A quiet joke I almost shared out of habit, and then remembered there was no one to receive it. Those moments didn't hurt sharply. They drained me. I realized I had lost the only person who had ever made me forget to manage myself. With them, I hadn't needed to perform adulthood. I didn't have to be impressive or composed. I could be unfinished. And I had traded that for control. I kept telling myself that longing was just nostalgia. That it would pass. That attachment always fades if you give it time. I waited for indifference to arrive like a cure. It didn't. Instead, life became flatter. Achievements landed without weight. Compliments slid off me. Success felt like something happening near me, not to me. I smiled automatically and felt nothing afterward. I started questioning myself in ways I never had before. Had I misunderstood love? Had I exaggerated its importance? Or had I just chosen a life where depth was permanently optional? The most unsettling part was how functional I remained. Nothing was wrong enough to justify my emptiness. There was no crisis to point to. No tragedy to blame. Just the quiet consequence of a decision that made sense logically and failed emotionally. I tried to recreate what I had lost. I dated people who were compatible. Sensible. Available. On paper, they were everything I should have wanted. But conversation stayed on the surface. I listened, nodded, participated, and waited for something to click. It never did. I realized I wasn't lonely for a person. I was lonely for a version of myself that no longer existed. The one who felt without calculation. The one who didn't need certainty before committing. The one who believed that meaning was worth risk. That version of me had only existed briefly, and I had dismissed it as impractical. Years passed. And then one day, without warning, the truth landed fully. I was sitting alone in my apartment, surrounded by everything I had worked for, and I understood something with terrifying clarity. If they walked back into my life at that moment, I wouldn't know how to meet them anymore. I had optimized myself out of the capacity to love deeply. Stability had trained me to avoid disruption. To protect my routine. To value predictability over presence. I had built a life that required me to stay emotionally guarded to function. And love, real love, doesn't survive that environment. That realization broke something in me. Not loudly. Slowly. I started replaying our conversations, not romantically, but analytically. I noticed how often they had reached for me, and how often I had stepped back. How many chances I had framed as, not now. How many signals I had ignored because acknowledging them would have forced a decision. I told myself timing was the problem. But timing had never been the issue. Courage was. I wasn't afraid of losing stability. I was afraid of building a life that couldn't be reversed. And now, ironically, I had done exactly that. The emptiness deepened into something heavier. Not depression, resignation. A quiet understanding that some mistakes don't explode. They settle in and become part of the structure of your life. I didn't cry. I just felt older than I was. I realized I had reached the point where regret was no longer about missing them. It was about recognizing that I had chosen a life that required me to stay emotionally safe forever. And safety, I learned too late, is a poor substitute for meaning. That's when the question I had avoided for years finally surfaced, fully formed and impossible to ignore. What if the most stable life is also the loneliest one? And what if the chance to choose differently had already passed? There's a moment when regret stops asking questions. It stops whispering what if and maybe and if only. It settles into something heavier, acceptance. Not peace. Acceptance. I reached that moment on an ordinary evening. No anniversary. No trigger. Just a quiet realization while doing something trivial that should have felt comforting and didn't. I was surrounded by the life I had chosen, the clean lines, the predictability, the absence of chaos, and I understood something I could no longer deny. This life worked. And that was the problem. It worked because it asked nothing emotionally dangerous of me. It required discipline, not vulnerability. Management, not surrender. I had built a world where I could function indefinitely without ever risking being undone. Love would have undone me. That's why I didn't choose it. I stopped telling myself stories about timing after that. Timing had never betrayed me. I had betrayed myself by using logic as armor. By confusing stability with wisdom. By believing that feelings should earn their place in a life already designed. I thought I was being careful. What I was really doing was rehearsing for a future where nothing essential could touch me. I considered reaching out. Not dramatically. Not to reclaim anything. Just to say the things I had never said, that I had been afraid, that I had felt more than I admitted, that I understood too late what I had let go of. But honesty doesn't always arrive with entitlement. Some doors don't reopen, not because the other person is cruel, but because reopening them would cost them their peace. I respected that. That respect became part of my penance. Instead of chasing a second chance I hadn't earned, I stayed with the consequences of my first choice. I let them teach me. I let them hurt without trying to convert the pain into meaning too quickly. I learned something difficult and necessary. Love is not something you fit into a life once everything else is secure. It is something you build around, or you lose the ability to build it at all. I didn't destroy my life by choosing stability. I hollowed it out. And hollow things don't collapse. They endure. Quietly. Efficiently. Without depth. I live with that now. Not dramatically. Not tragically. Just honestly. I've stopped pretending that my regret is temporary. I don't expect it to disappear. It's not meant to. It's a marker, a reminder of who I was when I chose safety over truth. But here's the part one didn't expect. Regret, when you stop fighting it, sharpens your integrity. I no longer postpone honesty. I don't negotiate with my own feelings. I don't treat connection like a luxury to be earned after everything else is handled. I can't undo what I lost, but I refuse to repeat the pattern that cost it. If love appears again in my life, it won't have to wait until I'm ready. Because readiness is a lie we tell ourselves to delay courage. I don't know if another chance will come. Some consequences are final. But this is what I know now, and what I wish I had understood back then. Stability can keep you safe. But only love makes you alive. And if you ever find yourself standing between the two, telling yourself you'll choose love later, understand this. Later is not a guarantee. It's a gamble. And sometimes, by the time you're ready to risk everything, there's nothing left to risk it for. I chose stability. I kept it. And I learned, too late, what it cost me.